Accepted.
Welcome. I hope you are all doing well today and that you will enjoy the next 15 minutes that we'll spend together. Can you imagine working without support for refactoring, code completion, and other features of modern IDEs that are considered a must nowadays? No? And why I'm asking such an absurd question in the first place? Well, Frodo couldn't imagine how he would get to Mordor either when he embarked on his journey. As I gathered from my experience, working without these must-have IDE features might resemble his wandering and the challenges he had to overcome. I'll tell you how I came to terms with such inhuman working conditions, what I learned along the way, and how you can utilize web IDEs. My name is Pavol Dudrik, and I work as a lead data engineer at GlobalLogic Slovakia. Previously, I worked as backend developer, Android developer, and full-stack developer. As you can imagine, those are quite different worlds, both in terms of technology stacks and development tools you have at hand. Naturally, throughout these roles, I had a chance to get familiar with various local and web IDEs. But before we dive into that, I'll give you a fair warning. As you could have noticed already, I'm a huge fan of movies and related memes. So, when I was developing Android apps, web apps, and backends, I usually use the most popular local IDEs. I hadn't heard about terms like Web IDE, Online IDE, or Cloud IDE. For me, an IDE was always a piece of software that you have to install on your local machine, and the idea of having an IDE in a web browser didn't even occur to me back then. But we'll get back to that in a minute. When I first found out that I can generate boilerplate code with just a few clicks in the IDE, I suddenly felt like Neo from Matrix. My life had changed forever. Unfortunately, I was young and unwise, so I didn't use these newly found superpowers to get more free time, for my self-development, of course, but rather to get more work. How so? Well, I was working faster, and consequently, my managers were able to give me more tasks, and they gladly did so. Otherwise, they wouldn't be good managers in the first place. Nowadays, I'm not that young anymore, yet I cannot say that I'm wise. I took advantage of various features, code completion, refactoring, debugging, and others. I relied on them so heavily that I didn't really know how to write anything properly anymore. Function name? Sure. Parameters? Why not? Import? Right away, sir. But as a wise man once said, you don't need to remember how to write code. You just have to know how to get the IDE to write it for you. Nowadays, we can substitute the IDE with AI, but there are plenty of other talks on AI at this conference, so we will not go into that. As I mentioned, I felt unstoppable, but everything has to end one day. And these great times had ended when I had a chance to start working on a brand new data engineering project. Back then, I had some experience with Apache Spark and building Spark projects in Java via local IDEs. Naturally, I accepted the new opportunity, and I was super excited that I would be able to improve my Spark skills and, at the same time, utilize the same toolset I was used to. What can go wrong here, right? Well, as you could have guessed, I was in for a huge surprise, and not the pleasant one, like when you find money in trousers you have not worn for months. The toolset I was used to was no more, and I found myself in a web interface where I was supposed to write code in a notebook style. Those of you that are familiar with Jupyter or Databricks notebooks probably know what I'm talking about. You can do heinous things, like create various cells with the same variable and then use the variable. And only God knows what's going to be the end result. The web IDE did not really support autocomplete, not until you've actually ran the code, which kind of defeats the purpose of autocomplete, if you ask me. The features like project level refactoring or searching were a thing of past, which was really painful, especially in the beginning. But there was an upside. Since I had to know all the imports and function names by heart, I was fully aware of what code I was writing. Overall, it felt like going from programming in this to this. So, not really an improvement, I would say. The overall performance of the editor did not really meet my expectations, and it let you know quite often that the selected front-end stack was not an ideal choice, both in terms of performance and reliability. As opposed to that, while I was using IDEs, I was able to utilize all the resources of my local machine. So I was really limited only by the amount of memory and the CPU of my computer. But who needs performance if you don't have any features that would actually require some serious compute resources, right? The absolute peak of missing features, at least for me, was version control that was implemented on file level. So you had to link every file with Git individually, believe it or not. I spent days asking myself, why would somebody do something like that? Just why? I couldn't come up with any logical explanation. Therefore, I didn't use this feature at all. I just downloaded my changes and committed them from my local machine. A side note, so I don't cause any mental distress by this presentation, this WebID doesn't work like anymore, and it integrates version control in a more appropriate way, let's say. But as Master Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. So I swallowed the bitter pill, decided to focus on the upsides, and to focus on all the perks this new environment offered. I tend to look for positive aspects of everything I do. And I found out that working without the features that simplify your day-to-day tasks can actually boost your creativity. How so? Well, if you don't have all the tools that you were using, you have to find a way to improve your workflow and find new means to be more effective. And in case of web IDEs, you have to be very creative. The quite obvious advantage that I identified at the very beginning of working with web IDEs was that you only need a web browser, and you can work from any location and any device, as long as you have an internet connection. This was an absolute game changer for me. It's super useful, especially when you are out of office and somebody urgently needs your help. You can log in from your phone or your friend's computer and continue right where you left off. Also, our laptops do not last forever, and in case your machine suddenly dies, and it happened to me a couple of times, not my fault, of course, you have to get a replacement and start working as soon as possible. You might be in the middle of development of an important feature or a production crisis. There are super anxious stakeholders that are waiting for work to be done yesterday, as usual. If you use a setup with WebIDE, there is no need for you to install or configure anything, as everything is stored in cloud. As opposed to that, with local IDEs, you have to install the IDE, all the plugins, language-specific tools like JDK or Python, install and configure Git, and the list goes on. I've actually started using local IDEs again recently, and after I spent years complaining about web IDEs, I got a tough reality check. The pain I had to endure to set everything up was pretty similar to how Anakin Skywalker must have felt after Obi-Wan was done with him. Install 3 different versions of JDK, install Scala, install Python, install the IDE, all the plugins, set up Artifactory credentials, install security certificates, and other bits and pieces. And those of you that have worked for large companies probably know that half of those things are forbidden by a company's policy. So you end up creating a heap of tickets to resolve everything. I don't know about you, but for me, the phase where you have to set everything up before you can actually start programming is the worst. After all, we are called programmers, developers, software engineers, not software installers. In case of Web IDE, you don't care about any of it. There is no hassle at all. You're assigned to a role or a group, and you have access to everything you need. And it's not just about the initial setup, but the maintenance over time as well. You have to update your operating system, your IDE, all the tools you use. And anything can go wrong at any time. While you are dealing with those issues, your bandwidth is effectively reduced. In case of a managed tool, you don't care about any of it. You just use the tool with its latest features and updates, and that's it. So Web IDEs have really potential to shine if you do ad hoc experimental work. Whether you want to try new JavaScript code, tune your CSS, run Spark queries against the existing dataset, or just experiment with Python. The nature of Web IDEs allow you to do so in a rapid manner. You don't need to set up a project or configure any infrastructure. You just open a web page, type in your code, and see the result immediately. Of course, let's not pretend that everything works all the time and that there are no issues. I came across really mind-blowing errors coming from the actual execution context where I had no control whatsoever. So I could only report the issue, find a workaround, if any was possible, and wait until it is officially fixed by the vendor. Web IDEs still have a long way to go, but they have been evolving rapidly to support as many features known from the local IDEs as possible. The level of maturity differs heavily from one Web IDE to another, but the most popular ones have grown tremendously over the past years. Of course, some are pretty basic and can be used as an enhanced code editor. Others can be quite complex and can be used as a standalone solution where you can write, edit, and run your code. But as usual with technology, it all comes down to your use case. So, as an old proverb says, it's better to see something once than to hear about it 1,000 times. I've listed a couple of Web IDEs you might want to try, so you can make your own assessment about their viability for you. They are free, or at least partially free. So how to pick the best option for you? Well, let's summarize the topics I've covered today so you can make a decision what might be the best option. With Web IDEs, you can work from any location and any device. You have all the latest features and updates available. There is almost no initial setup needed, and the hardware requirements are basically non-existent as long as you can run a web browser. On the other hand, depending on your use case, you might be lacking the advanced features like project-level refactoring, code completion, debugging, and others. So a well-maintained and structured project is a must, otherwise it might turn into a huge mess very quickly. If you don't have internet access, you are done. In case of local IDEs, you can do at least something without the internet connection. Of course, there might be issues that you have no control over, and you have to wait until the vendor fixes them. So I'll leave it up to you to make a decision what might be the best solution for your specific use case, but me being able to compare both local and web IDEs over the years, I would say that I still prefer local IDEs a little more, even though they're a bit harder to set up. So to answer the question from the title of this talk, are local IDEs over? No, not at all. Thank you for joining me today. Please leave feedback in the Devoxx app so I can improve. Feel free to connect and share your experience about Web IDEs, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.